Every day, we see the darker side of the world around us. We witness how people can hurt others in ways that are hard to understand. It's a sad part of life, but it's something we can't ignore. As someone who dives into the world of crime, I'm here to share the most shocking stories and try to understand what drives people to do such things. I'm Michael, and today, I've got another unreal true crime story for you. On a quiet October night in Mount Vernon, New Hampshire, something terrible was about to happen. Kimberly Cates and her young daughter, Jamie, were asleep in their home, unaware that danger was just outside. Four people, carrying weapons and dark intentions, cut the power to the house and slipped inside. What happened next would change their lives forever and shock the entire town. This is the story of a horrifying crime that no one saw coming. Kimberly Cates came into the world on March 6, 1967, in Toledo, Ohio. She grew up with two brothers, Jeff and Scott, and was a cherished aunt to her niece Nicole and nephew Christopher. Kimberly stood out with her tall, slender frame, dark hair, striking eyes, and an ever-bright smile that seemed to light up every room she entered. Her husband often described her as a whirlwind of energy, excitement, and life, with a contagious smile and an unforgettable presence. Kimberly had a calling for nursing, a field where her compassion and care for others flourished. After completing her nursing education at Pima Community College in Tucson, Arizona, she began a career that allowed her to make a real difference in people's lives. In 1997, she married David Cates, and a year later they welcomed their daughter, Jamie. The bond between Kimberly and Jamie went far beyond the typical mother-daughter relationship. They were inseparable. Family friends often remarked on their shared warmth and kindness, traits that endeared them to everyone around them. The Cates family eventually moved to Mount Vernon, New Hampshire, a quaint colonial town near the Massachusetts border. Known for its peaceful atmosphere, Mount Vernon was a small, tight-knit community of around 2,000 residents. Violent crime was virtually unheard of in the area, with the last significant incident dating back over 160 years. The Cates' home was nestled in a wooded area, offering a serene environment for their family. Kimberly worked at several hospitals across New Hampshire, earning a reputation as a dedicated nurse and loving mother who truly treasured her time with her family. Meanwhile, Stephen Spader, born on November 9, 1991, had a turbulent start to life. Removed from his biological mother due to her struggles with addiction, he was adopted as a newborn by Stephen and Christine Spader. Despite a stable middle-class upbringing in Brookline, Massachusetts, Stephen struggled with behavioral and emotional issues. Diagnosed with bipolar disorder and major depression during his teen years, he attended various treatment programs and saw multiple therapists. His parents made significant sacrifices, even borrowing against their home, to support his care and education. Yet, Stephen's life veered increasingly toward trouble, marked by run-ins with the law and disturbing behavior. Stephen's rebellious streak led him to form a group he called the Disciples of Destruction in September 2009. The group, composed of his closest friends, Christopher Gribble, Quinn Glover, and William Marks, bonded over their shared frustrations and aimlessness. Stephen, the leader, devised twisted plans for the group, including fantasies of breaking into homes and harming strangers. He even created a manifesto that outlined the group's goals and rules, emphasizing loyalty and their so-called brotherhood. On October 3, 2009, Stephen set a sinister plan into motion. Gathering his friends, he instructed them to bring weapons and tools for what he chillingly referred to as a job. They even researched how to make chloroform, intending to incapacitate their victims. By the early hours of October 4th, the group was on their way to Trow Road, united in their dark purpose. The houses along this secluded road were spaced far apart, surrounded by woodland, providing a sense of privacy and isolation. On this particular night, the Disciples of Destruction chose a home at random, number 4. Inside, Kimberly Cates and her 11-year-old daughter Jamie were sound asleep in the master bedroom. David Cates, Kimberly's husband, was away on a business trip. Known for her careful nature, Kimberly always ensured the doors were locked, but that night, a living room window had been left open. Before entering the house, the Disciples of Destruction cut the power, plunging it into darkness. They climbed through the open window and used the glow from an iPod flashlight to navigate. Quietly, they made their way upstairs to the master bedroom, pausing just outside the door. Stephen Spader slowly pushed it open, shining the flashlight inside. Believing the room was empty, he whispered to Christopher Gribble, "No one's here." Disappointed, the group began retreating, until Kimberly stirred, mistaking the noise for her daughter. "Jamie, is that you?" she asked. Stephen immediately dropped the flashlight and moved toward the voice on the right side of the bed. Christopher followed, taking the left. Standing in the hallway, William Marks and Quinn Glover covered their ears as Stephen began swinging his machete, delivering brutal blows to Kimberly. Jamie woke to the sound of her mother screaming, witnessing the horrifying attack. In an attempt to shield her mom, she threw herself over Kimberly, but Christopher yanked her away, stabbing her repeatedly in the face and chest as he tried to hit her heart. Stephen struck Kimberly with the machete a total of 32 times, inflicting devastating wounds all over her body. Forensic examination later revealed that her skull had been split open, exposing her brain. Defensive wounds on her hands and arms showed she had fought to protect herself, enduring every blow while still alive. As the attack continued, Stephen slashed Jamie's throat with such force that her jaw was fractured. He then struck her head and severed part of her left foot. Despite the unimaginable pain, Jamie pretended to be dead, lying motionless in hopes her attackers would leave. After ransacking the house for valuables, the group fled, leaving behind a horrifying scene and a piece of paper bearing their group's logo. Once she felt it was safe, Jamie summoned the strength to crawl to the phone and call 911 before collapsing. Within minutes, a police officer arrived and peered through the window to find Jamie, drenched in blood, lying on the floor. Kicking the door open, he approached the trembling girl, who whispered faintly, "I think my mommy is dead." He carried her outside before discovering Kimberly's lifeless body upstairs, her injuries severe and her clothing partially removed. Jamie was rushed to a hospital in Massachusetts, where she spent over 2 weeks in intensive care, undergoing multiple life-saving surgeries. Doctors later testified that had she delayed calling 911, she would have died from a punctured lung. Meanwhile, the group stayed at the home of their friend, Autumn Savoy. Instead of reporting the crime, Autumn helped them clean their weapons and dispose of their blood-stained clothing. The group dumped the evidence into the Nashua River and wiped down their weapons using a fast food bag. Later, Christopher updated his Facebook status, writing, "Had an awesome time with Steve and Autumn. Dexter is such a funny show." The next morning, Stephen and Christopher searched online for news about the attack, discovering that Jamie had survived. Frustrated by their failure to eliminate all witnesses, they began planning their next attack, undeterred by the carnage they had already caused. Within 14 hours of the attack, investigators began to suspect Stephen Spader, Christopher Gribble, William Marks, and Quinn Glover as the culprits. Their suspicions were bolstered by Jamie Cates's description of her attackers, which matched the four men. However, the breakthrough came when the group was caught attempting to pawn jewelry belonging to Kimberly Cates. On October 6th, all four were arrested on murder charges. During police interviews, Stephen attempted to shift blame onto his friends, even stating they deserved the death penalty. Christopher, on the other hand, confessed that he and Stephen had been planning to kill someone for a long time. Disturbingly, he admitted feeling no remorse during the attack and expressed regret only that Jamie had survived, stating he would have killed her if he had realized she was still alive. Gribble even asked detectives if Jamie was in a coma, remarking, "I kind of feel like I hope she gets better." Autumn Savoy, a friend who helped the group destroy evidence and provided a false alibi, was also arrested. He had claimed the group spent the entire night with him, but evidence revealed otherwise. All four suspects were held on $500,000 cash bail, awaiting trial in separate facilities. While in custody, Stephen openly bragged to cellmates about the crime, describing the bloodshed and boasting about the brutality of his actions. He even wrote a song about the attack, with lyrics detailing the horrific events. In the weeks leading up to his trial, Stephen penned a letter to a local newspaper, angrily defending himself against public judgment. He criticized the victim's husband, David Cates, for objecting to the inclusion of William Marks and Quinn Glover in their high school yearbook. Stephen dismissed David's grief as overblown, insisting it was up to the courts, not the public or the victim's family, to determine guilt. On November 9, 2010, Steven Spader was convicted of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, burglary, witness tampering, and attempted murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge made it clear that Stephen's fate was sealed, stating, "You will stay in that cage for the rest of your pointless life." During the trial, Stephen shocked observers by asking his attorney if the jury would sing "Happy Birthday" to him, as the verdict was delivered on his birthday. At the sentencing, David Cates delivered a heartfelt victim impact statement. He spoke of the devastating loss of his wife, Kimberly, and the emotional toll on their daughter, Jamie. "Kim was beautiful and will always remain in our hearts," he said. He described Jamie's unimaginable suffering and expressed hope that love and support from family and friends would help her heal. In 2013, Steven Spader attended a resentencing hearing where his lawyers argued that his life sentence was cruel and unusual punishment due to his age and mental health history. Surprisingly, Stephen opposed their efforts, stating he wanted to take responsibility for his actions. Referring to himself as the most sick and twisted person you'll ever meet, he read an apology letter to Jamie and Kimberly's family, which they found deeply offensive. The judge upheld the original sentence and added 76 years to his term, ensuring Stephen would never leave prison. The chilling testimony from Christopher Gribble painted a disturbing picture of the night of the attack. According to his account, the events unfolded in a haze of detachment and eerie clarity. He recalled hearing a female voice softly ask, "Jamie, is that you?" before everything took on a surreal, almost automatic quality. Steven Spader dropped the iPod and moved toward the right side of the bed, while Christopher, almost unconsciously, found himself walking toward the left. He described not even realizing when he had drawn the knife, only noticing it was in his hand as he moved. When Jamie stirred on the bed, Christopher noted she seemed groggy, possibly murmuring something like, "Mommy." Almost simultaneously, Stephen began slashing at the bed with his machete, the blade repeatedly striking the blankets and the figures underneath. Christopher heard screaming followed by a sharp sound which he later described as a shriek or a gasp as the violence intensified. Without consciously deciding to act, He reached out and began stabbing at the form in front of him, guided by an inexplicable sense of where to strike despite the near-total darkness. When asked if he and Stephen were attacking simultaneously, Christopher confirmed, adding that it was remarkable he didn't get hit by the machete in the chaos. He admitted he couldn't explain how he avoided injury, but described Stephen's relentless hacking as unending, continuous blows with no pause. Christopher's confession was laced with unsettling detachment, oscillating between grim acknowledgement and a twisted sense of fatalism. He detailed how, during his police interrogation, the investigators mentioned the possibility of the death penalty. Initially confused about what capital murder entailed, he eventually understood it could result in execution. Reflecting on this, he vacillated between anger and a grim resignation, thinking, if they give me the death penalty, I'll just be dead, and this will all be over. During this interview, Christopher began to realize the weight of the evidence against him. He noted that investigators seemed to know details that only he and Stephen could have shared, such as the burial of the weapons. At this point, he concluded that Stephen must have spoken to authorities, effectively sealing his fate. In a later courtroom testimony, Christopher spoke about his mental state leading up to the crime, describing disturbing fantasies he had harbored for years. He revealed that, as early as 2006, during a cadet camp, he had shared his thoughts about torturing his mother. Speaking in a calm, almost casual tone, he described his preoccupation with violence, claiming it stemmed from a deep-seated mental illness. Gribble's defense hinged on an insanity plea, asserting he was not in control of his actions during the attack. However, the jury was presented with a stark contrast between his claims of insanity and his methodical planning and awareness during and after the crime. His confession provided a chilling insight into the mind of a killer, leaving no doubt about the calculated nature of his actions. During his teenage years, Christopher Gribble often felt like an outsider. He partly attributed this to being homeschooled, a decision he believed limited his social interactions. Under questioning from his defense attorney, Gribble admitted to harboring dark fantasies about killing his mother. Gribble went on to acknowledge the possibility that, if sent to a secure psychiatric unit, he might one day be released. On March 25, 2011, Christopher Gribble faced charges including first-degree murder, attempted murder, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, witness tampering, and conspiracy to commit burglary. He pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. However, the jury found him sane, and the judge sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. At the sentencing, David Cates delivered a powerful victim impact statement. With visible pain, he said, "I've lived the accounts of Kim's murder, one excruciating blow after another. Through these accounts, I have heard my wife's last breath, heard my daughter's screams, seen my daughter's perfect body mutilated." In 2013, Gribble appealed his sentence, but the appeal yielded no changes. He remains incarcerated at the New Hampshire State Prison, serving a life sentence without parole. The fallout from the attack also extended to William Marks, who was sentenced to a minimum of 30 years in prison on March 21, 2014. Marks had pled guilty to charges of burglary, conspiracy to commit burglary, and being an accomplice to first-degree assault. The judge condemned his role in the crime, stating, "You planned and you watched, and you celebrated the unspeakable horrors you inflicted on an innocent mother and child." Marks's father, James, later spoke publicly about his son's actions, expressing deep regret. If he could go back and change it, he would, and it's just devastating for every parent of these boys. James shared his lingering questions about what led his son down this path, reflecting on photos of a younger William and wondering where things went wrong. He admitted to concerns about the group his son was spending time with, particularly Stephen Spader, whom he referred to as Stevie. James described how William had recently been trying to distance himself from Spader, even ignoring his calls. Despite his observations, James made it clear he wasn't seeking sympathy for his son. "What he did was wrong. My heart goes out to the family. What can you even say to someone in that situation?" In March 2014, Quinn Glover was sentenced to a minimum of 20 years for his role in the crimes, including robbery, burglary, and conspiracy to commit burglary. The judge acknowledged that Glover had been the least involved in the killings. During his sentencing, Glover expressed deep remorse, telling the courtroom, "There's nothing I can do that will ever make up for my despicable actions." Both William Marks and Quinn Glover are serving their sentences in separate prisons in Vermont. Autumn Savoy, who helped cover up the crime, was sentenced in April 2011 to 5 years for destroying evidence and providing a false alibi. He was granted early release in May 2015. After his release, Autumn returned to his parents' home and worked 2 jobs at the Mall of New Hampshire. In December 2022, he announced on social media his intention to start a podcast to support individuals looking to rebuild their lives after incarceration. In January 2010, Steven Spader's daughter was born, but she was removed from her mother's care just 5 days later and placed with her paternal grandparents. Steven has written letters pleading to see his daughter, promising to be the best father in the world. Despite his imprisonment, he reportedly speaks with his parents daily and receives weekly visits where they share new photos of his child. Steven was transferred to New Jersey State Prison in February 2014, and just a few months later he was seriously injured in a prison altercation. Recently, he has claimed to have found peace with God, maintaining a fitness regimen, limiting carbs, and focusing on personal growth. In the wake of Kimberly Cates's tragic death, the Amherst Country Club established the Kimberly Cates Memorial Scholarship to honor her legacy. Each October, a golf tournament raises funds to support students who struggle with school expenses. Since its inception, the scholarship has raised over $250,000, continuing Kimberly's legacy of helping others. 2 years after Kimberly's murder, the Kimberly Cates Law was passed, expanding New Hampshire's death penalty criteria to include home invasions that result in murder. However, the state abolished the death penalty in 2019, rendering the law defunct. Despite her immense trauma and life-changing injuries, Jamie Cates returned to school part-time just 3 weeks after the attack. She excelled academically, earning straight A's, and thrived athletically, especially in hockey. A decade later, Jamie spoke with a TV show about her life, sharing how she was studying public health as a senior at the University of North Carolina. She graduated that year and went on to work at the Southern New Hampshire Medical Center while continuing to enjoy hockey. The Mount Vernon and Amherst communities have shown unwavering support for the Cates family in the years following the tragedy. Kimberly's wake was held at Smith and Heald Funeral Home in Milford, New Hampshire, followed by a funeral service at the First Congregational Church in Mount Vernon. She was laid to rest at Green Lawn Cemetery, where her memory lives on in the hearts of her husband David, her daughter Jamie, and the community that cherished her. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.